You're listening to the Mike on the Right podcast.
Hiya, folks. Your favorite conservative podcaster, Mike Neal here. You are listening to the Mike on the Right podcast for episode 11, July 11, 2025, broadcasting from the heart of the heartland, the great Hoosier State, the crossroads of America. Great to be with you today. Thank you so much for listening, for your support. Please like, share, subscribe, follow, 5-star, anything you can do to continue to help us grow. We're doing this for you. I'm doing this for you, and I appreciate you being here today with me. Before we get to the issues of the day that I've been talking about now for the last few days that I wanted to bring up, I want to cover one quick announcement related to the operational change that I've been contemplating for this show, not in terms of format, but in terms of when it's recorded and when it's released. We heard you loud and clear, my faithful listeners, my faithful friends, as to when this show should be recorded and released. And we put out a poll, and it kind of jived with the research that I had done and some of the podcasters I've spoken to earlier in the week. An earlier release in the week is better for all of you because that's when you start something new. Your drive time, you have a bigger propensity of listening to a show like this on Friday. You're like, you know what? I'm getting tired. It's been a long week. I'm getting ready to go home, have food out on the grill and build a fire and go places and do the things. And so some of you aren't necessarily thinking about that on Friday. There's a great chunk of you that are. And have been faithful just because I think you're my friends and you've been invested, and I appreciate that. And we've got new people to the show as well. But the poll very clearly said that Monday is the most popular. There was a group that said didn't matter when. There were very few that said anything about, hey, Friday's a great time. So starting on July 21st, so this is the last episode you're going to hear on a Friday, at least for it being recorded. Starting on July 21st, that will be the next episode, episode 12 of Mike on the Right. So the Friday, July 18th show, which would be typically the next one, you won't see one. All you'll be able to do is come back and listen to this one. But starting on Monday, it'll be released just in time for your drive time or whatever it is you might be doing in the morning. Of course, you can listen to it any time across any week or weeks. I know some folks listen to them in batches. But that's when it's going to be released. It'll be by 7 a.m., maybe before that for those of you who drive early. I'm going to record it either Friday or over the weekend. Gives me more time to gather some materials. And then Monday, it will be launched. So this is the last Friday episode as far as the release is concerned. The next one will be July 21. So I did not forget you. I did not forget to record. We'll announce it on social media as the time comes. Now, past that, we got to get into the items we have. We got a lot to talk about today, as we always do on this show. First, why are courts across America continuing and creating sweeping injunctions against the Trump administration, what the Supreme Court said about that process, and why courts keep doing it no matter what the Supreme Court said on the matter. We're going to dig into the facts of that, and I'm going to certainly give you my opinion. We're going to talk about the tragic flooding that occurred in Texas and what's been going on over the past several days. We're going to talk about what's true, what's not, but ultimately what can we learn from it as a nation and for preparedness and response moving forward. And the last item we'll talk about today is why public broadcasting in America is under scrutiny. We're going to talk about details of a federal bill that's looking to strip government funding from NPR and folks like that. We're going to get into the how, the why, and what I think about that as well. So let's get to it. Let's start with what I like to call the imperial judiciary, which I stole from Amy Coney Barrett, Associate Justice on the Supreme Court. Why are the lower courts looking to undermine the Trump administration, or are they undermining him? Question mark. Let's talk about that. Why does it seem like every time President Trump tries to enforce immigration law or rein in the bureaucracy, there's some random judge in California or D.C. or New York that blocks him in a nationwide injunction? You probably think about it. Even if you don't agree with him, you're like, yeah, this is great. We got him. A judge got him. Why is that possible? Is it possible? And we're going to talk about that. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled on this matter in another case. We're going to talk about that in a second. And it kind of set some guardrails to this process, yet we just saw at least two more, and there may be more, national injunctions placed by lower courts. So are they allowed to do it? Should they be doing it? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the context for this whole thing. President Trump and his administration, this is even a continuation of things that they did in the first term. They continue to face legal resistance from lower courts by folks that are suing against implementations of his agenda. In the past year alone, multiple district courts, or since this year, because he hasn't been quite in a year yet, but since he's come into office, several district courts have issued nationwide injunctions against his executive policies, executive orders, and how they implement executive agencies. Most recently, injunctions were issued by lower courts even after the Supreme Court, very recently, in U.S. v. the Arizona Coalition for Border Enforcement, a landmark opinion reinforcing that nationwide injunctions are rarely appropriate. Yet we see them all the time. So what is the Supreme Court talking about here? The Supreme Court has ruled against these nationwide injunctions, at least in general, because they've really placed some sweeping rules here. Let's talk about why. First of all, what is a national injunction? It's when a single federal district judge stops the federal government from enforcing a law or a policy anywhere in the country, not just in the judge's jurisdiction. Now, of course, a federal judge has, they're federal, right? So a state Supreme Court can't put its will upon things going on in Illinois, etc., but the federal government is all 50 states and territories. So it seems, a federal judge, well, they should be able to do that. Well, not quite, at least not according to the Supreme Court. Let's talk about some of these policies that have been blocked. Asylum restrictions at the southern border, reinstating the Remain in Mexico policy, executive orders reining in DEI mandates. And we're not talking about, anti-discrimination laws. We're talking about DEI mandates that have essentially put people of color who may not be qualified for a position ahead of those who are. And my opinion is, I don't care what nationality, what race, what religion, if they're being hired for a job, federal or private, we want the best people, period. We don't want quotas. So the president's been getting rid of that at the federal level. Parental rights in education. A lot of these, that just happened here not too long ago. That's one of the newest ones in Massachusetts. And here's what the Supreme Court said about sweeping injunctions. In the Arizona Coalition case, the Supreme Court emphasized that lower courts must avoid overreach. Injunctive relief should be no more broad than necessary to redress the plaintiff's specific injury. So, not a machete, a scalpel. Not a shotgun, something more precise. And my favorite quote from Justice Barrett, Amy Coney Barrett, one of my favorite justices, in her concurring opinion, nailed the problem. We must beware of replacing what people are saying is the imperial presidency with an imperial judiciary. It is not the job of the courts to make new law. It is not a job of the courts to do and take away the executive's role. She's warning about courts usurping that power and turning themselves into policymakers. We saw that in Obamacare. And I talked about this on the show before, and if you are a conservative or anyone that's in healthcare policy, you know. The Supreme Court just one day, the ruling was, this is a tax. It's okay. There was never any discussion about it being a tax. There was never any legislative intent. There was nothing in the law that said this is a tax. When it came to the individual mandate, when it came to any of the Obamacare policies that took money out of our pockets and killed my health insurance, when 95% of people get to keep their doctors. I didn't get to keep my insurance when that happened. But anyway, that's what she's talking about. That's what this is talking about. And so let's talk about this process. This is my opinion. This isn't judicial review. This is judicial activism. Judicial review is legitimate, period. It allows courts to interpret laws. That's their job. And to say whether or not they are constitutional or not. Not add to it, not subtract from it. Judicial review is different than this activism that we're seeing. These lower court judges are not interpreting laws. They're blocking executive policy entirely, nationwide. It has nothing to do with review. It's activism. We're creating new laws with some of these rulings based on ideological disagreement. The founders would be appalled. The Constitution separates powers for a reason, so that we don't have, speaking of all you folks, no kings, Is the judiciary really your king because it's your last bastion to stop things? It clearly hasn't, because the Supreme Court disagrees with you overwhelmingly. Some of these aren't even 6-3 ideological items. The Congress makes the laws, the executive enforces the laws, and they're the executive agencies, and the judiciary interprets the laws, reviews them, and blocks things that are not constitutional. And time again, the Supreme Court has had to invalidate these injunctions because they're too far-reaching. They are outside what the judiciary should be doing. This is lawfare. The left knows it can't win at the ballot box with these radical policies. There's just another poll today that came out in the Hill that suggests that the Democrats, even in what appears to be a great environment, that history usually sides with the opposite party of the presidency that has just been won when it comes to midterms. We see that the Democrats continue to be in disarray. The progressives are destroying what's left of the Democratic Party. And they can't get the big, beautiful bill, which they should, whether they like it, it's good policy, but they don't like it, so they should be able to coalesce around it, and it's just not happening. So the left uses the courts to stall, sabotage, and override the will of the people. For the most part, I'm getting what I voted for. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to agree with me. That doesn't mean we can't be friends. It doesn't mean we can't agree to disagree. It doesn't mean we can't debate these things. But that's not what this process is for. And always remember, when the nuclear option was used, and if you don't know what the nuclear option is, it was now a lot of the judges don't have to be cloture motion, which in the Senate, you have to have 60 votes to move on from debate. That was destroyed by the Democrats, by Chuckles Schumer out in New York. And the famous speech by Mitch McConnell at the time was, beware, what you do today is something we can use later. They're the ones that destroyed that process. So just remember, what you do today can now be used later. So getting through your agenda, it's going to backfire on you. We shouldn't do that. These injunctions aren't about justice. They're about delay. They're about disruption. Let's talk about the latest federal district court ruling that really is overreaching. A federal district judge in Illinois issued a sweeping nationwide injunction preventing the Trump administration from enforcing new Medicaid rules that allow states to exclude Planned Parenthood from their provider networks. The Trump administration policies were based on federalist principles, allowing states to determine qualified Medicaid providers based on ethical and medical standards, including abortion referrals. Now, I disagree in part. I am a purist, and someone will probably use this against me one day. I believe abortion is a nationwide question. And it should not be that I can go to one state or the other and have abortion or not. Life is life in all 50 states, should be protected in all 50 states. But it's what we have. Medicaid continues to be used to fund organizations that continue to do abortions. Now, there are federal bans on those funds, but we all know that money is fungible. And if they're getting plenty of money from the federal government to do other things, they can use the money that they raise for abortions. And if Planned Parenthood, which has other services which are necessary, but if Planned Parenthood continues to insist on, it's anti the mission. If you're having, medical care for women and for babies through Planned Parenthood and the tests and all those things and cervical cancer and all the things that people like Planned Parenthood provide on one side, that is anti the abortion side. It's either life or death. You can't have both. You're either going to be life, you're going to be death. Separate that away, probably wouldn't have this type of problem, but you have it, and that's where they are. This is another clear-cut case of a lower court nullifying a Supreme Court ruling because it doesn't like the political outcome. Medicaid should not be used in any way to provide money to abortion providers, even if they're not. Again, the money is fungible. This is that. Are you proving that Medicaid dollar didn't go to abortion? Sure. But the fact that we're continuing to prop up an organization that won't cease it, it's inappropriate for federal funding. It proves that the judiciary is no longer interpreting law, it's playing partisan referee. Again, regardless if you're a Republican or Democrat listening to this show, liberal or conservative, libertarian, Green Party, no party, independent, hate politics. That's not the role of the courts. And if the courts can do this to you now, unchecked, they will continue to do it, and it will affect you one day in something that you care about. So care now before it gets to that point. Medicaid is administered by the states, and the executive branch sets the guidelines, not unelected judges. And if Planned Parenthood wants to stay in the Medicaid system, they can simply stop performing abortions. That's the trade-off. This isn't a constitutional crisis. This isn't anti-women. This is not anti-health. This is being pro-life, one, and two, pro-state. And while I have a position on what should happen nationally, states should be allowed to administer this program according to current law. And judges shouldn't be doing it for us. The Supreme Court has already told these lower courts to stop issuing these injunctions, but activist judges are still doing it. They're getting away with it because no one is holding them accountable. And I guarantee you when this gets up to the Supreme Court, they're going to admonish them for telling them to hack off, which is what they have done. And judges like that who are rogue and radical should be impeached, not for the position, but for defying Supreme Court ruling and precedent that has been created. Courts do not run immigration policy. Courts do not control the executive branch. Courts do not run Medicaid. Courts do not make law, and we have to stop that. As Justice Barrett warned, we fought against the idea of an imperial presidency. Now we're sleepwalking into an imperial judiciary. The solution? Reform the judiciary's abuse of injunctions, appoint constitutionalist judges, and remind the bench the robe is not a crown. Let's move on to a topic that's a little more solemn before we kind of get to the meat of it. Let's talk about these Texas floods. Before we talk political realities on this next topic, I wanted to start with what matters most: acknowledging lives lost, pain inflicted, destruction, families destroyed, shattered, well more than 100 people gone. I don't even know the number at the time of this broadcast. People's homes and livelihoods destroyed. Texans hurting. If you're watching or listening from across the country, there's one thing that I ask of you: pray. Faith without works is certainly dead, but pray first. And then consider donating, consider helping, consider whatever it is that you should feel like you should do. Pray for these families. Pray for the first responders. Pray that survivors could still be found. Pray for the recovery ahead. This isn't about being on the left or being on the right. It's about being human. We have to, of course, then address the realities of making sure this doesn't occur again. But first, the human element, and the element that the Lord calls us to be compassionate and comforting and empathetic to those who have experienced loss. And I pray for all of them involved, and will continue to do so over the coming days. Let's talk about what actually happened. There was a devastating flood hitting around the areas in Hunt, Texas, Kerr County. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Surrounding areas, over 15 inches of rain fell within hours. That's huge. It overwhelmed drainage systems. It turned roads into rivers. But almost immediately, as soon as this all occurred, the blame game started. Social media started to point fingers at NOAA, looking at climate change, blaming Donald Trump, blaming Governor Abbott. And there's certainly an investigation that needs to occur at the highest level to find out where the failures are. But let me be clear, and I'm sure you've heard the news as to what happened. I'm not going to deep dive into every little thing that occurred. I want to talk about how we move forward from this, how we investigate this, how we ensure this doesn't happen again. And yes, if there are those who had a lapse of judgment or who weren't doing their job, we've got to do something about that. But let me be clear, no president, past or present, can stop 15 inches of rain. When something happens like this, that's nobody's fault. It's an act of the weather. It's an act of God. What then people should be held account to is the response afterwards. NOAA warned of flash flooding days in advance. The models were generally accurate. Alerts were issued, but there's a problem with some of that. We'll get to that in a second. But the data is no good if local government, which are the ones who are responsible for notifications of people, doesn't act on it. And this is where it gets serious. There were huge local failures that are now coming out in this investigation. Over 90 minutes of silence. New reports show that local officials in Kerr County waited 90 minutes after the first signs of danger, after being told by those above them, hey, this may be coming, you should let people know. And the question was from those folks that they contacted were, we have to check with our supervisor. This should be a snap decision. This should be a snap call. 30 seconds shouldn't have grown under these folks. This is not a political attack, but it's a fact. And waiting 90 minutes when people are going to bed, it's everything. It's everything in this type of response. And it led to probably a greater disaster than should have occurred. Would the water have risen anyway? Certainly. But lives could have been saved. People died in cars, they died in homes, they died in low-lying neighborhoods, they died in camps, Camp Mystic. Many who never knew they were in danger. And certainly, this is an extreme weather event. We're not going to get into the whole climate change thing because things like this have occurred before, and they will occur again. It's about how we prepare and respond. It's about how we warn. That's where this needs to happen and needs to be looked at. We have to stop playing national politics every time we see an opening as a partisan. That's what this has led to. No, the layoffs at NOAA did not affect this. Period. So we're not even going to go there. It's not cruel to demand accountability. It's compassionate. If the system broke down at the local level, then we need to fix it. If it broke at the federal level, we need to fix it. But every sign points to those in the local area being notified by those at the federal level and at the expert level. Now, maybe they couldn't pin everything that was going to occur, but it was very clear that there could be a problem. Texans deserved leaders who act fast, communicate clearly, and prioritize human life over political optics. Stop pointing the fingers. Again, extreme weather is real. It's happened since the dawn of time. And instead of blaming Texas oil or capitalism, we need to invest in better local response systems. We need to get the right people in place at the local level. This is an opportunity to look at drainage systems, faster emergency alerts, better processes. Investigate the bad response and fix those things and get rid of people who may have seriously erred. Let's not get, okay, we got to go. This is climate change. Greta Thunberg, where's she at? She rolling on up here? No, she ain't going to be anywhere near this. Nor should she be. To say this is all about NOAA layoffs is crap. Weathermen are wrong often as well. Some people are saying that, the data was it wasn't clear enough. It was clear enough. Is it going to tell you exactly how much it's going to rain and how fast it's going to come? No. But as it got closer, it began to become more accurate, which is a normal process. And warnings did go out within the timeframes they were supposed to. There was a breakdown at the local level. Leadership is staying calm in crises. It's giving people the truth, not excuses, not narratives. It's stepping up and saying, we failed here and we're going to do better next time. Look at every element of this, but do not make this a political game so that you can dunk another one on Donald Trump or dunk another one on those who are skeptical about climate change. That's what Texans deserve. That's what Americans expect. But again, as I close this segment, beyond everything, compassion, prayers, unity, not political games. We're looking for real answers, real truth, and real action. And as I close, may God comfort the grieving. May we rebuild stronger. And may we always choose the truth over political blame games. We must, and we will, do better. Last segment. Time's getting tight here. I want to talk about this hidden pipeline of money that goes to places like NPR. Why are we in this position of talking about defunding them? You've probably heard that NPR only gets 1% of its funds from the federal government, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, and it simply isn't true. Today, I'm going to pull back the curtain on how public funds flow into one of the most partisan media institutions in America, whether we like it or not. As people have seen, NPR's been crying that they only get 1% of their annual budget directly from government sources, like the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. But that is not the full story. Remember, I talked a little bit ago about the fungibility of money. The real money comes through its member stations. Remember, NPR, there are spokes from that, which that is around 30% of NPR's revenue. And those member stations get about approximately 10% of their revenue from the federal government, including those from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, those federal grants, which means minimally 3% or more of NPR's money is in federal origin and could be more in some circumstances. This is like we're saying, we didn't get that big of an allowance, but your brother does, and he's been feeding it to you under the side, and you're saying, I don't have any money. Same effect. Why does this matter at the local level? Well, local NPR-affiliated stations in small towns and rural areas depend heavily on these grants to stay on the air. These grants keep NPR syndication models alive. They pay for Morning Edition, All Things Considered, all these syndicated episodes and things. So when you fund local public radio, you are funding NPR's national platform by extension. This model makes NPR politically insulated. Even if donors dry up, taxpayers keep the lights on through backdoor channels. And here's why this is a problem. NPR's news reporting leans to the left. Their own former ombudsman and whistleblowers have called out the newsroom's liberal biases, and recent polling shows that less than 25% of Republicans trust NPR, and there's a reason for that. And it doesn't mean that we should be following the edicts of either parties. It's very clear there's a trust issue, and there's a trust issue around all of media right now, but specifically here. And I was getting roasted on TikTok yesterday. I almost think about closing my TikTok altogether just because the ability for folks to understand the complex matters of the day seems to be somewhat lower with those who keep getting my videos. I don't understand, but my friends were demanding examples. Yuri Bearliner, who was an editor there, it's been a couple years back, was fired for speaking the truth about editorial bias. This person was working to help fix it from within and then got boosted. And this person clearly talked about all of the intentional biases that they have. The reluctance to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story. NPR was at the center of this. Selective framing on major cultural and political issues. We're paying for the microphone as Americans, but we're only getting one side of the story. This isn't against like shows like Arthur and the different programs of the day on NPR and PBS and all those different folks. This is about using federal dollars to prop up one party's agenda, and it is inappropriate. So here's something great. My friend, Indiana Senator Jim Banks, introduced the Defund NPR Act earlier this year, and the goal is to eliminate federal funding, direct and indirect, for NPR and its affiliates and its successors because of the bias that they are perpetrating using federal dollars to the American people. Jim Banks said taxpayers shouldn't be forced to fund a platform that actively pushes one ideology, and he is absolutely right. As I said before, it is inappropriate for federal funds to be used to push political ideologies disguised as news. This isn't journalism. This is activism. This bill includes provisions to cut CBP appropriations, to ban that whole pass-through process of federal funds to any stations that syndicate NPR, and force transparency on public broadcasting finances. This bill is about fairness, transparency, accountability. It's about taking the activism out of the news, and I am fully supportive of that bill, and I call on all members of Congress to pick this bill up and move forward. So as I close, NPR isn't just a public radio network. It's been a political institution supported by your tax dollars. And it doesn't matter what the individual's political positions are, but if they're using their positions to carry a message of partisanship, federal funds should be banned. I support efforts like Senator Jim Banks' bill, and I hope you do too, and let your representatives know you're done funding bias disguised as journalism. News should simply be the news. Tell me what one side said. Tell me what the other side said. Here's the data. Here's the facts. Let me decide. If you want to do, this is why I read the Wall Street Journal, because their news is pretty straightforward. Now, they have an editorial lean to the right. The editorial is one thing, but they're also not receiving public funds like NPR. But I want news as unbiased as possible. Now, I read everything just because I live this every day, but Wall Street Journal is what I read the best and the most because it has the best coverage. That's much more of a just, here's the data, here's the facts, and then you're a smart adult, figure it out for yourself. And that is what we should be expecting. Folks, thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Again, like, share, follow, subscribe. Give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen. I greatly appreciate your listenership. Just remember, as kind of a final announcement, the next episode falls under the new release schedule. So episode 12 will release before your Monday morning drive time on July 21st. Have a great week.